I almost turned around before I even reached the table. I was standing near the host's stand, half checking my phone, half wondering how long I had to stay before I could honestly tell my friends I had made an effort. It was one of those places that wanted to feel relaxed and expensive at the same time. Low lights, polished wood, people talking like they were all in the middle of important lives. I was in a neutral mood. Not hopeful, not annoyed, just braced for another evening of careful questions and fake laughs with somebody I would probably never see again. Then I looked up, and there she was, Evelyn Parker. She was already seated, one hand resting near a water glass, posture straight, expression calm for about half a second before it broke. I knew her instantly, even after all that time. Same controlled face, same steady eyes that always made it seem like she noticed more than she said. For one stupid moment my body reacted before my brain did. I actually stopped walking, just froze there like I had taken a wrong turn and wandered into a part of my life I had no business seeing again. She stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor. "Kyle." I gave a short laugh that had no humor in it. "Yeah." There was a full second where neither of us moved. I could see she was as thrown as I was. Not mildly surprised, genuinely hit by it. And that somehow made it worse, because it meant this wasn't some setup where one of us had known. Neither of us had been warned. "I didn't know it was you," she said. "Same." The host was looking at us like he was trying to decide whether to bring menus or security. Evelyn glanced toward the door. I followed her eyes because I was already thinking the same thing. Leave now. Make some polite excuse. Save both of us the strain of sitting through this. But walking out felt weird too. Too abrupt. Too unfinished. Like we would both carry the unfinished version of it afterward. She let out a slow breath. "We can call it here." "We can't," I said. Then, after another second, "or we can sit down, get through one dinner, and pretend we're normal adults." That got the smallest change in her face. Not a smile exactly, but close. "One dinner," she said. "One honest dinner," I added, and I don't know why I said that except the whole thing already felt too strange for small talk. She nodded once. "All right." So I sat down across from a woman I knew from one of the worst years of my life. Back then, during the collapse of my marriage, I saw Evelyn mostly in fragments. Conference rooms, hallways, glass offices. She was one of the senior HR people brought in while my department was getting torn apart from 3 different directions. Budget issues, staff cuts, complaints, leadership changes. All of it hit at the same time my home life was coming apart. I was sleeping badly, missing details, showing up late, and pretending I had everything under control when I clearly didn't. And Evelyn had been there for that version of me. The version with tired eyes, a tight jaw, and just enough pride left to make everything more embarrassing. The server came over, and for the first 10 minutes we did what people do when they have no idea how to be in the same room. We ordered. We commented on the place. We asked safe questions with careful answers. It felt stiff enough to crack. Then Evelyn set down her glass and looked at me directly. "I really didn't know it was you. I believe you." "I almost left," she said. "I did too." That honesty settled something. Not much, but enough. I leaned back and looked at her properly. "Can I ask you something?" "You probably will anyway." That almost made me smile. "Fair." She waited. I rubbed my thumb against the edge of the napkin, suddenly feeling more tense than I had when I walked in. Back then at work. During all of that. I paused, hating how quickly I was right back inside those memories. "I always assumed you saw me as a mess. Like one more guy falling apart in public and making everybody else deal with it." Her face changed, but only slightly. The kind of shift most people would miss. I kept going because once I started, I couldn't really stop. "You never said anything unfair." "That's not what I mean. It was more the way you were. Professional. Distant. I just figured you looked at me and saw exactly what I was trying not to be." Evelyn held my gaze for a long moment. The noise of the room seemed to pull back. Even the server passing behind her felt far away. Then she said, very quietly, "Kyle, you got that completely wrong." She didn't say it fast, and she didn't soften it either. "Kyle, you got that completely wrong." I just looked at her. Evelyn folded her hands loosely on the table, like she was choosing her words with care, not because she was nervous, but because she didn't waste words. That was the same thing I remembered about her from back then. The difference was that now I was sitting close enough to see something else in it. Not coldness. Restraint. "I never saw you as weak," she said. "Or unstable. Or embarrassing, if that's what you've been carrying around." I gave a quiet laugh. That is more or less what I've been carrying around. I know. That surprised me enough that I actually frowned. You know? Yes, she said. Because men who think they're hiding that kind of damage usually aren't. They're just trying to stay functional. And that's what I remember about you. Not that you were falling apart. That you were carrying more than most people around you understood, and you still kept showing up. I didn't have anything ready for that. I had spent years with a different version of that time in my head. A harsher version. One where everybody around me had seen the cracks, judged them, and moved on. Hearing her say it like that felt strange in the worst and best way at once, like somebody had opened a window in a room I'd been sitting in too long. You respected me? I asked, and even to me it sounded more exposed than I wanted. She held my gaze. Yes. I looked down at the table. For a second I was back in those office hallways, running on bad sleep and black coffee, trying to keep my voice level in meetings while my phone lit up with messages from a home that no longer felt like mine. I remembered seeing Evelyn outside conference rooms, seeing her name on emails, feeling that tight drop in my stomach every time HR got involved in anything. I had attached her to that whole period so completely that I had never considered she might have been seeing me as a person at all. But you never said anything, I said. No, she replied. I couldn't. That came out flat and honest, no self-defense in it. My job at the time wasn't to comfort you. It wasn't to step into your private life, or reassure you, or blur professional lines because I felt bad for you. I had to be careful with everyone, including you. She paused. That doesn't mean I didn't notice. Something in my chest shifted at that. The food came, and neither of us touched it for a moment. It felt ridiculous. Two adults staring at plates neither of us cared about while a conversation neither of us expected kept opening wider. I hated that period, I said finally. Not just because of the divorce. Because I had to go through all of it in public. At work, I mean. I always thought people must have been watching me come apart in installments. Some probably were, Evelyn said. I looked up. She gave the smallest shrug. People watch when something is painful and visible. That part is true, but that doesn't mean they understood it. And it doesn't mean they had the right read on you. You did. I had a better one than you think. There was no pity in her voice. That mattered more than I could explain. We actually started eating then, slowly, talking between pauses that no longer felt forced. The conversation changed shape after that. It stopped being about the shock of seeing each other and became something else. Simpler, but more dangerous in its own way. Real. She told me she had almost canceled tonight because she was tired and didn't trust set-up dinners anymore. I admitted I'd said yes mostly because my friends were getting tired of hearing me say no to everything. She asked how long I'd been on my own now. I asked whether she always looked that calm when she was uncomfortable. No, she said. You do tonight. That should worry you. That made me laugh for real, and I noticed her mouth shift at the corner, like she was trying not to smile too much at once. By the time the plates were cleared, the whole room felt different. Or maybe I did. I wasn't sitting across from Evelyn Parker, HR consultant, witness to one of the lowest periods of my life. I was sitting across from a woman who had remembered me more carefully than I had remembered myself. When we stepped outside, the night air hit cold and clean. We stood near the curb under the restaurant sign, neither of us moving right away. Well, I said, that was not the usual blind date. No, she said. It wasn't. There was a pause. Not awkward. Just full. Then she said, I'm glad I stayed. That landed harder than it should have. Yeah, I said. Me too. She nodded once, like that was enough honesty for one night. Then she got into her car and left. I stood there longer than necessary before heading to mine. Over the next 2 days, I told myself to leave it alone. Strange dinner. Important conversation. Nice correction to an old memory. Let it stay where it was. Clean. Finished. Then my phone lit up at 9:43 on a Thursday night. Evelyn, I realized after I got home that we never found out whether either of us even likes Italian food. I stared at that message longer than I should have, then typed back. Me. I was too busy having my entire personal history revised to notice the pasta. Her answer came a minute later. Evelyn, fair. That should have been the end of it. Instead we kept texting. Not constantly. Not in some reckless, all-day flood. A few messages, then silence, then another one late at night. Dry humor. Small questions. A level of ease that caught me off guard because there was nothing flashy about it. It just kept happening. A week later we met for coffee. That turned into 90 minutes. The next time, We met again because we both pretended we had practical reasons to be in the same part of town. That one lasted even longer. We sat by the window of a quiet cafe while the light outside faded and the staff stacked chairs around us in the other section. At one point, I checked the time and realized I had stopped tracking it completely. On the walk back to our cars, Evelyn tucked her hands into her coat pockets and looked ahead as she spoke. "I should probably be more careful than this," she said. "About me? About anything that starts to matter." I turned to look at her, but she didn't look back. And that was the moment it hit me. I wasn't just wondering what she had meant that first night anymore. I wasn't just trying to repair some old memory of myself through her eyes. I wanted her in my life now. After that walk, things between us changed without either of us officially saying so. There was still restraint. Maybe more of it, actually. Neither of us rushed to define anything. We didn't suddenly start acting like reckless people who had forgotten we both had jobs, routines, and a full set of reasons to be careful. But the tone shifted. The pauses got easier. The messages got later. The time we spent together stopped feeling accidental. A few days later, we met after work for coffee, and it turned into a walk because neither of us wanted to sit under bright lights with other people around us. The weather had that late evening chill that made the streets feel cleaner than they did during the day. We kept a steady pace without trying to fill every second. Evelyn was quiet for a stretch, then said, "I've spent most of my life being the person other people can rely on without ever becoming someone who relies on them." I glanced at her. "That sounds practiced." "It is. Working for you." She gave a small breath that might have been a laugh. "Depends what you mean by working." We crossed at the light and kept going. "When I was younger," she said, "control felt smart. Distance felt smart. If you stay measured, if you stay careful, if you never need too much from anyone, then you can avoid most of the damage." Most. She looked ahead. Enough to convince yourself it's a good system. That stayed with me. The thing about Evelyn was that she never dramatized herself. Even when she admitted something personal, she did it cleanly, almost plainly, which somehow made it hit harder. There was no performance in her. No fishing for reassurance. She just opened the door a few inches and let me decide whether I was paying attention. I was. A week later, I was the one who texted too late. "Couldn't sleep. You awake?" Her answer came back after less than a minute. "Yes." That turned into one of those conversations that only happens when it's late enough for both people to stop pretending they're fully guarded. Nothing reckless. Nothing exaggerated. Just honesty with less armor on it. At one point she asked, "Do you still think about that period a lot?" I stared at the screen before answering. "More than I admit." Then I added, "It's not even the marriage part most days. It's who I was while it was happening." She didn't answer right away. When she did, it was simple. "You survived it. That version of you still counts." I sat on the edge of my bed reading that again and again, annoyed by how much it got to me. The next time we met, it was at a small place near her office. Nothing romantic about it on paper. Two adults having dinner after a long day. But by then I knew better than to pretend that was all it was. We talked for nearly 3 hours. Work, families, habits, the weird private ways people build their lives around old injuries and then call it personality. At one point I asked, "Do you ever let anybody all the way in?" Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She turned her glass once against the table with her fingertips. "Not often," she said. "Because of trust? Because closeness changes the balance." That sounds like something you'd tell yourself, not me. She looked up at that, and for the first time that night, I saw her lose a little of that usual control. "It is," she said. I let the silence sit. Then she asked, "And you?" I knew what she meant. Not dating. Not whether I could be around someone. Whether I could let a person close without waiting for the shift, the disappointment, the point where things stop feeling safe and start feeling expensive. "Not easily," I said. "I still expect to be seen at my worst, and then remembered that way." Her eyes stayed on mine. I know. That was the closest we had come to saying what was happening between us. No touching across the table. No dramatic confession. Just two people who understood exactly where the bruise was. And maybe that was why the timing of everything felt so sharp when the outside pressure finally showed up. It started small. An email chain. Then a meeting Kyle from 3 years ago would have dreaded and current me didn't like much better. An internal review had reopened around staffing decisions tied to my old department. Mostly because someone higher up wanted old documentation cleaned up before a broader restructuring moved forward. On its own, it should have been routine. Annoying, but routine. Then I saw Evelyn's name copied on a follow-up request. Not because she was handling it directly now, but because she'd had professional overlap with the original mess years earlier. Her role had touched enough of it that people were pulling old notes, timelines, recommendations. And just like that, what had felt private between us no longer felt protected by distance and time. When we met the next evening, I could tell she already knew. "This is bad timing," I said. "Yes," she replied. We were standing outside a coffee shop, neither of us making a move to go in. I shoved my hands into my jacket pockets. "How bad?" She was quiet for a second. "Bad enough that if anyone becomes aware that we've been seeing each other, they may read backward into things that had nothing to do with this." "That's convenient." "It usually is." I let out a breath and looked away down the street. People passed around us without noticing anything. I almost envied that. "So what happens now?" I asked. Evelyn's face didn't change much, but I could see the tension in the set of her jaw. "That," she said carefully, "is what I'm trying to decide without making a worse situation out of a real one." I nodded, but the words landed badly. Because for the first time since this had started, it felt possible that we had found something solid at exactly the point where the safest move would be to step away from it. For the next 2 days, I told myself not to assume the worst. That was harder than it should have been. Once the review became real, something old came back fast. Not panic exactly. More like that familiar, sour expectation that when things get complicated, people start protecting themselves in the most predictable way possible. Clean distance. Careful wording. Quiet retreat. I hated how quickly my mind went there, but I knew where it came from. I had lived through enough of it already. Evelyn and I still exchanged messages, but they changed. Not colder, just more measured. More gaps between them. More things clearly being left unsaid because neither of us was careless enough to pretend the situation didn't matter. Then she called me. Not texted. Called. I was in my kitchen when I saw her name and felt my whole body tighten before I even answered. "Hey." Her voice was steady. "Are you home?" "Yeah. I need to tell you something before you hear it indirectly." I leaned against the counter. "That already sounds bad." "It's manageable," she said. "But it needs to be handled correctly." I waited. "There were questions this morning about the timeline around your department. Not about you personally at first. About process, recommendations, who had visibility on what, who was present for which decisions. Routine mostly. Then someone mentioned that I had prior overlap with the situation and asked whether I had any current contact with anyone connected to it. I closed my eyes for a second, and I said yes. That made me straighten. I didn't speak right away because I was trying to decide whether I'd heard her correctly. "You said yes." "I did. You could have avoided that." "I could have," she said. "And then if it came out later, it would look like concealment instead of context." I walked a few steps across the kitchen and back again. "Evelyn, do you understand how that could land on you?" "Yes." "And you did it anyway?" "Yes." There was no hesitation in her voice. None. I stopped moving. She went on. "I also made it clear that our contact began recently, well after the original matters in question, and that I am not participating in any recommendation or decision related to your old department now. I requested formal separation from anything that could be interpreted as overlap." That was so exactly her that it almost knocked the air out of me. Clean. Direct. No drama. No attempt to hide. No move to protect herself first by quietly stepping away from me and pretending the whole thing had been a mistake. "What was the reaction?" I asked. "A mix," she said. "Some annoyance. Some caution. Some concern about optics, which is predictable." Then, after a pause, "I can absorb that." I laughed once under my breath, not because anything was funny. "You shouldn't have to." "Maybe not," she said. "But I'm not letting vague suspicion settle on you because that would be easier for everyone else." That was the exact moment I understood what she was doing. Not just managing a professional issue. Standing beside me in the one place where it would have cost her least to step back. I sat down at the kitchen table. "All this time," I said, "I think part of me was still waiting for the old pattern." "What old pattern?" "For the safer option to win." Her voice softened, just slightly. "I know. We didn't say much after that. We didn't need to." She told me what would happen next. Documentation. Recusal. A few awkward conversations. Nothing explosive, nothing public, just enough internal friction to make her week unpleasant. Before we hung up, there was a quiet pause on the line that felt fuller than anything either of us had said. Thank you, I told her. You don't need to thank me for telling the truth. Maybe not. I'm still going to. Another pause. Then she said, I know. A few days later, when the worst of it had passed, we met in the park near the river. Early evening, cold enough that most people kept moving instead of lingering. It was the kind of setting that made honest conversation easier because there was nothing performative about it. No table between us. No staff around. Just open air and enough room to say what had been waiting there. Evelyn had her hands in her coat pockets when she walked up. She looked tired, more than I was used to seeing, but not uncertain. How bad was it? I asked after we started walking. Unpleasant, she said. Not catastrophic. You took the hit anyway. She looked over at me. I made a choice. Why? That got the smallest change in her expression, like she had expected harder questions than that. Because stepping away to keep things neat would have said something I don't believe, she replied. I let that sit for a few steps. And what don't you believe? That this is disposable. We kept walking. The river was dark and flat beside us. Somewhere behind us a bike passed, then the path went quiet again. I looked ahead and said, You know I expected you to distance yourself. Yes. I'm not proud of that. I didn't say you had to be. I nodded once. Fair enough. After a minute, she spoke again, more quietly this time. Kyle, I have spent most of my adult life choosing distance because it made me feel competent, in control, safe, and maybe sometimes it was. But I don't want to keep making that choice automatically just because it's familiar. I turned toward her. She had stopped walking, so I stopped too. She met my eyes and held them. No speech prepared. No dramatic build. Just Evelyn, saying the hardest thing plainly because that was the only way she knew how. I don't want to keep you at arm's length and call it wisdom, she said. Something in me went still. For a second, I had the urge to make a joke, break the pressure, protect both of us from how real the moment was. But that would have been the old move. Safe, neat, useless. So I told her the truth too. I don't want to lose this by reducing it to bad timing, I said. I've done enough of that in my life. Naming something important as impossible because that hurts less than trying. Her face changed then. Not dramatically, just enough. We should still be careful, she said. We will. This doesn't need to become bigger than it is. It won't. And it's not simple. I almost smiled. No, it's not. She let out a breath, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked like someone allowing herself to stop bracing for impact. Then she stepped closer. It wasn't some reckless movie moment. No audience. No rush. Just the simple fact of us standing there without the old versions of ourselves between us. The man I had been during the worst year of my life. The woman I had mistaken for distant because I never imagined she was being